The wedding day was like a dream come true for Lisa. After years of waiting, hoping, and overcoming life's challenges, she was finally getting married to Mark, the man she believed was her perfect match. The venue was decorated beautifully, with flowers lining the aisles and fairy lights twinkling above. The guests were excited, dressed in their best clothes, chatting happily as they waited for the ceremony to begin. Everyone could feel the joy in the air. Lisa's 10-year-old daughter, Emily, was one of the happiest people there. She had been looking forward to this day almost as much as her mother. Dressed in a soft pink flower girl dress, she looked adorable, carrying a small basket of petals. She had practiced her walk many times and was excited to be part of this special moment. Mark, the groom, stood at the altar, smiling confidently. He was well liked by Lisa's friends and family. He always knew the right things to say, making Lisa feel special and loved. To everyone watching, he seemed like the perfect man, a responsible, caring person who would be a great husband and stepfather. As Lisa walked down the aisle, her heart raced with happiness. She saw the way Mark was looking at her, and it reassured her that she had made the right choice. Emily tossed flower petals along the path, giggling softly when some of them landed on Lisa's dress. Lisa smiled at her daughter, feeling a deep sense of love. This was not just the beginning of a new life for her. It was supposed to be a fresh start for both of them. The ceremony went perfectly. Vows were exchanged, rings were placed on fingers, and when the officiant finally announced them as husband and wife, the guests cheered. Lisa felt a wave of emotion as Mark gently lifted her veil and kissed her. She could hear her friends clapping and her mother wiping away happy tears. Everything was just as she had imagined. As they walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, Emily ran up to Lisa, wrapping her arms around her mother. "Mom, you look like a princess," she whispered excitedly. Lisa laughed and hugged her daughter tightly. It was a perfect moment, filled with happiness and love. The reception started soon after, with music, laughter, and celebration. The guests were enjoying their meals, dancing, and sharing stories about Lisa and Mark. Emily, full of energy, ran around with some other kids, enjoying the night. Lisa watched her daughter and smiled. Everything felt right. But deep inside, there was a small feeling she couldn't ignore. It was something she had brushed off before, thinking it was just her imagination. Mark had always been polite to Emily, but he never showed the warmth that Lisa had hoped for. He wasn't cruel, just distant, as if he didn't know how to connect with her. Lisa had told herself that it would change with time. After all, not everyone knew how to be a parent right away. As the evening continued, Lisa pushed away her worries. Tonight was about celebrating love and happiness. She had no idea that in just a short time, everything would change. In the weeks before the wedding, Lisa had been the happiest she had ever been. She was busy with the final preparations, choosing decorations, tasting cakes, and making sure everything would be perfect. But in the middle of all this excitement, there was something small, something quiet, that made her feel uneasy. She didn't talk about it much because she didn't want to ruin the happiness surrounding her big day. It was about Mark and Emily. Lisa had always imagined that her future husband would not only love her but also care for her daughter as his own. Emily was her whole world, and she wanted someone who would cherish her just as much. Mark had never been unkind to Emily, but there was a distance between them that Lisa couldn't ignore. At first, she thought it was just because they were still getting used to each other. After all, Mark had never been a father before. Maybe he just needed time to learn how to bond with a child. But little things made Lisa stop and think, like the way Mark barely paid attention when Emily talked excitedly about her favorite cartoons, or how he would gently move her aside if she tried to hug him. Lisa's mother had noticed it too. One evening, while Lisa was showing her the wedding decorations, her mother hesitated before speaking. "Are you sure Mark is the right one?" she asked softly. Lisa frowned. "What do you mean?" Her mother sighed. "I just don't see him making much of an effort with Emily. Have you talked to him about it?" Lisa had brushed it off with a smile. "It just takes time, Mom. He's not used to kids yet. He'll come around." But later that night, she found herself lying awake, thinking about her mother's words. Deep down, she wanted to believe that Mark just needed more time. Love would grow, just like it had between her and him. Emily, on the other hand, had been trying in her own little way. She would show Mark her drawings, tell him about school, and even bring him snacks when he was watching TV. Sometimes, he would smile and thank her, but most of the time, he seemed distracted, as if he didn't quite know how to respond. One day, just 2 weeks before the wedding, Emily had quietly told her grandmother, "I don't think Mark likes me." Her grandmother had held her close and whispered, "Your mommy loves you more than anything. If something ever feels wrong, you can always tell her." But Emily hadn't told Lisa. She didn't want to upset her mother when she was so happy. She thought maybe she was just imagining things. Maybe, if she tried harder, Mark would like her more. Lisa had no idea that these small, quiet worries were signs of something much bigger. She was too busy planning for a future filled with love and happiness, never realizing that everything she had built was standing on shaky ground. The wedding reception was filled with joy and celebration. Guests laughed, clinked their glasses, and danced to the music. The room was beautifully decorated with twinkling lights and fresh flowers, creating a magical atmosphere. Lisa, dressed in her white gown, couldn't stop smiling. She had married the man she loved, and everything felt perfect. Emily was having fun too. She had already eaten her favorite cake and was now playing with a few other kids near the dance floor. She loved weddings because they felt like fairy tales, and tonight was no different. Her mother looked like a princess, and she was happy to be part of this special day. Mark was surrounded by his friends, laughing and talking. He had always been the charming one, making jokes and keeping conversations lively. But Emily had never felt that warmth from him. She had tried to be polite, to stay out of his way, but something about him always made her feel a little nervous. Lisa watched her daughter from across the room and felt her heart swell with love. She was so proud of Emily, her kind and sweet little girl. She hoped that soon Mark would fully embrace her too, and they could truly be a happy family. At one point, Lisa was pulled away by a group of friends who wanted to take pictures with her. She laughed and posed for the camera, completely unaware of what was happening across the room. Emily, still playing with the other kids, accidentally ran too fast and bumped into Mark. He had been holding a drink, and it spilled slightly on his suit. It wasn't a big spill, just a few drops, but Mark's face changed in an instant. His smile disappeared, and he looked down at his suit in frustration. Emily immediately stepped back, her eyes wide with worry. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. For a brief moment, everything around them seemed to freeze. Then, something shocking happened. Mark reacted in a way no one expected. The room, once filled with music and laughter, suddenly fell silent. Everyone who saw what had just happened was too stunned to speak. Lisa, still smiling for the pictures, hadn't seen it yet, but the expression on the guests' faces told her something was wrong. She turned her head just in time to see Emily standing there, her small hands shaking, her eyes filled with tears. Lisa's heart dropped. She felt a strange, cold fear rush through her as she looked at Mark, who suddenly looked uncomfortable, as if he had just realized what he had done. The silence in the room was unbearable. Lisa's mother gasped. Some guests whispered in shock, and a few people stood up from their seats. It was clear that something had just happened, something that could never be undone. Lisa's joy from earlier had completely disappeared. In its place was a deep, rising anger. She knew, in that very moment, that everything had changed. The entire room was silent. It was as if the music had suddenly stopped, even though it was still playing softly in the background. People stared in shock, some whispering to each other, others frozen in place. No one knew what to do. Emily stood there, her small hands clenched tightly at her sides. Her big, teary eyes looked up at Mark, confusion and fear written all over her face. She had only been playing, only made a small mistake. She had apologized right away. But the way Mark had reacted, it wasn't right. Lisa felt like her heart had stopped for a second. One moment, she had been surrounded by laughter and happiness. And now, in an instant, everything had changed. She barely even processed what had just happened, but the look on Emily's face told her everything she needed to know. Without thinking, she rushed across the room. She knelt beside Emily, gently touching her daughter's face. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" she asked, her voice shaking. Emily didn't answer right away. She just nodded slightly, her small body still tense. Lisa could feel her daughter trembling under her touch. Lisa slowly stood up and turned to face Mark. Her chest felt tight, and her hands were shaking, but not from fear, from anger. "What did you just do?" Her voice was quiet, but there was a sharpness in it that made even the guests around them hold their breath. Mark looked uncomfortable, as if he knew he had made a terrible mistake. "It was an accident," he said quickly, his voice defensive. "She ran into me, and my suit got wet. You just what?" Lisa cut him off, her eyes burning with fury. "She's a child, Mark. She wasn't trying to do anything wrong." "I didn't mean to," Mark started, but he stopped when he saw the way Lisa was looking at him. Guests began murmuring. Some people looked at Mark with disappointment, others with disbelief. Lisa's mother stood up from her seat, shaking her head in anger. Emily's grandmother had always been kind and welcoming to Mark, but now her expression was filled with something else. Deep, unmistakable disappointment. A few of Mark's friends tried to step forward. "Come on, Lisa," one of them said hesitantly. "It was just a little mistake. It's not a big deal." "Not a big deal." Lisa turned toward them, her voice rising. "My daughter is standing here, shaking. How does that not a big deal?" Mark sighed heavily and rubbed his face as if he were frustrated. "Lisa, you're overreacting. It's our wedding day. Let's not make this into something it's not." Lisa felt something snap inside her. Overreacting. Had he really just said that? She looked down at Emily, then back at Mark. And in that moment, she knew this wasn't just one mistake. This was something deeper, something that she could never ignore. The wedding had started as the happiest day of her life, but now Lisa realized it might just become the day she made the most important decision she had ever made. Lisa's hands were shaking, but she wasn't sure if it was from anger or shock. The room was still filled with guests, yet it felt like only 3 people existed at that moment: her, Mark, and Emily. The little girl stood beside her, still quiet, still scared. Lisa could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on them, waiting to see what she would do next. Mark shifted uncomfortably, his face turning red as he realized the weight of what had just happened. He glanced around, noticing the judgment in people's eyes. His once confident posture was now stiff, and for the first time, he looked unsure of himself. "Lisa," he started, lowering his voice as if he could make this situation disappear. "This isn't how I wanted our wedding day to go. Let's just move past this, okay? Emily's fine. I didn't mean anything by it." Lisa's eyes widened in disbelief. Move past this? Had he really just said that? She felt a cold anger rise inside her. This wasn't just about the wedding anymore. This was about something much bigger. She looked down at Emily, who was gripping the edge of her dress tightly, her little fingers curled into the fabric. Lisa could still see the hurt in her daughter's eyes. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her shoulders and looked Mark in the eye. "You think we can just move past this?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "You think I can ignore the fact that you just hurt my child on our wedding day?" Mark let out a frustrated sigh. "Lisa, I already said it was an accident. You're making this a bigger deal than it is." A few gasps echoed through the room. Lisa's mother stepped forward, her expression filled with disappointment. "A bigger deal," she repeated, shaking her head. "Mark, if you think this is something small, then you don't understand what being a husband or a father truly means." Lisa felt her mother's words hit deep. She had been so blinded by love, by the dream of a perfect future, that she had ignored all the small signs leading up to this moment. Emily had felt uncomfortable around Mark for a reason. And now, standing there in front of everyone, Lisa knew she had to make a choice. The wedding wasn't just about her and Mark. It was about the family they were supposed to become. And if Mark couldn't love and respect Emily, then there was no future for them. She let out a shaky breath, then reached for her wedding ring. Slowly, she pulled it off her finger. The room fell completely silent as she looked at Mark one last time. "This wedding is over," she said firmly. A wave of shock spread through the guests. Some gasped, some looked at each other in disbelief, and a few even nodded in quiet agreement. Mark's face turned pale. "Lisa, don't do this," he pleaded. "Not like this. We just got married." Lisa shook her head. "No, Mark. I thought I was marrying a man who would love my daughter as much as he loved me. But I was wrong, and I won't make that mistake." With that, she took Emily's hand and turned away, leaving behind the wedding that was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. But deep down, she knew choosing her daughter over everything else was the best decision she had ever made. As Lisa walked away from the wedding hall, holding Emily's hand tightly, her heart pounded in her chest. The night air was cool against her skin, but she barely noticed it. Her mind was racing, her emotions tangled between anger, heartbreak, and relief. Emily looked up at her mother with wide, uncertain eyes. "Mom, are you mad at me?" she asked softly. Lisa immediately stopped walking and knelt down to Emily's level. She gently cupped her daughter's face and shook her head. "No, sweetheart. Never. You did nothing wrong. I am so sorry." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't mean to spill his drink," she whispered. Lisa pulled her into a tight hug, her heart aching. "It was just an accident, and accidents happen. That's never a reason for someone to be unkind to you. You deserve to be treated with love and respect always." For a moment, they just stood there in silence, wrapped in each other's warmth. Lisa felt a deep sense of clarity wash over her. She had been so blinded by the idea of a perfect marriage that she had almost overlooked the most important thing: Emily's happiness and safety. Behind them, the wedding hall was still buzzing with murmurs and whispers. Guests were in shock, some taking sides, others simply stunned by how quickly the night had changed. Lisa's mother stepped outside, worry etched across her face. "Lisa," she said gently, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Are you okay?" Lisa let out a shaky breath and nodded. "I think so. But I can't go back in there. I can't pretend like nothing happened." Her mother's eyes softened. "You did the right thing," she said firmly. "A mother's first duty is to protect her child. And you just showed Emily that her feelings, her safety, and her happiness come first." Lisa blinked back tears. She had spent months dreaming of this wedding, of a future with Mark, but now she realized that the future she had imagined wasn't real. Mark had never truly accepted Emily as part of his life, and that was something she could never ignore. Just then, the doors of the hall swung open, and Mark rushed outside. His face was a mix of frustration and desperation. "Lisa, let's talk," he said, his voice tight. "You're blowing this out of proportion. We just got married. Are you really going to end this over one small mistake?" Lisa straightened her back and looked him in the eye. "Mark, this isn't just about tonight. It's about everything leading up to it. You've always kept a distance from Emily. I convinced myself that you needed time, that things would change. But tonight, I saw the truth. You don't love my daughter. And if you don't love her, then you don't truly love me." Mark opened his mouth to argue, but Lisa didn't give him a chance. "I deserve someone who will love both of us. And Emily deserves to feel safe. This marriage is over, Mark." Mark's face hardened. He let out a frustrated sigh, shaking his head. "You're making a mistake," he muttered before turning away and walking back inside. Lisa felt a weight lift off her chest. She looked down at Emily, who gave her a small, hopeful smile. "Are we going home?" Emily asked. Lisa sat in the back seat of her mother's car, holding Emily close as they drove home. The bright wedding decorations, the music, and the laughter were now far behind them. The night had turned out nothing like she had imagined. Just hours ago, she had been a bride, ready to start a new chapter in her life. Now she was leaving that chapter behind before it could even begin. Emily rested her head on Lisa's shoulder, her small fingers playing with the edge of her dress. She had been quiet ever since they left the wedding. Lisa knew her daughter had been scared and confused, and that thought alone made her heart ache. Her mother glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" Lisa let out a long breath. "I don't know," she admitted. "I should feel broken, but I don't. I feel like I just avoided making the biggest mistake of my life." Her mother nodded. "You trusted your heart, Lisa. And more importantly, you listened to your instincts as a mother. That's something to be proud of." Lisa looked down at Emily, who was still snuggled against her. "I just hope she knows how much she means to me." Emily looked up at that moment, her eyes full of warmth. "I love you, Mommy," she whispered. Lisa felt tears sting her eyes. She kissed Emily's forehead. "I love you too, sweetheart. More than anything." When they finally reached home, Lisa carried Emily inside and helped her change into her pajamas. Even though it had been a long and emotional night, Emily seemed more at peace now. She climbed into bed, and Lisa tucked her in, brushing her hair gently. "Are you sad about the wedding?" Emily asked sleepily. Lisa thought for a moment. "I'm sad that things didn't turn out the way I hoped," she admitted. "But I'm not sad about my decision. You and we're a team. And I will always choose you." A small smile appeared on Emily's face. "I like our team." Lisa chuckled softly. "Me too." After Emily drifted off to sleep, Lisa sat in the quiet living room, her thoughts racing. She had spent so much time convincing herself that Mark was the right one, that he would eventually grow to love Emily like she did. But love wasn't something that could be forced. If Mark couldn't see how special Emily was, then he had never truly been the right person for them. Just then, her phone buzzed. She hesitated before picking it up. It was a message from Mark. "I still think you're overreacting. But if this is really what you want, I won't stop you. I hope you don't regret this later." Lisa stared at the message for a moment, then slowly placed her phone down without replying. She didn't regret her decision. If anything, she felt a strange sense of peace, like she had just saved herself from a future filled with unhappiness. For the first time in months, Lisa didn't feel unsure about her choices. She felt strong. She felt free. And most of all, she felt certain that she and Emily were going to be just fine. The morning sunlight streamed through the curtains, filling Lisa's home with a soft, golden glow. She sat at the kitchen table with a warm cup of coffee in her hands, staring at the steam rising from it. The events of the previous night still played in her mind, but something was different now. She no longer felt the weight of doubt or regret. Instead, she felt lighter, as if she had shed something that was never truly meant for her. Emily walked into the kitchen, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Good morning, Mommy," she said with a yawn. Lisa smiled and opened her arms. "Good morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep well?" Emily nodded and climbed onto Lisa's lap, resting her head against her shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Lisa kissed the top of Emily's head. "I'm more than okay," she said, hugging her tightly. "I have everything I need right here." Emily grinned. "Me too." Just then, Lisa's mother walked in, smiling as she watched them. "You two are glowing this morning," she said, sitting down across from Lisa. "I think that's the look of a fresh start." Lisa chuckled. "Maybe it is." She picked up her phone, scrolling through the messages she had ignored the night before. There were a few from guests expressing their shock, A couple from Mark's friends trying to justify what had happened, and one last message from Mark himself. "You'll regret this, Lisa." Lisa took a deep breath and deleted the message without a second thought. She didn't regret anything. She had made the right decision, not just for herself, but for Emily too. Her mother reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I'm proud of you," she said. "I know it wasn't easy, but you chose love in the right way. The love of a mother for her child is the strongest bond in the world." Lisa nodded, feeling the truth in those words. She had been so focused on finding love for herself that she had almost ignored the most important love she already had, the love she and Emily shared. "Mom," Emily said suddenly, tilting her head, "does this mean we can have a girls' day today?" Lisa laughed. "I think that's a perfect idea. What should we do first?" Emily's face lit up with excitement. "Pancakes," she said, "with lots of chocolate chips." Lisa and her mother laughed, and soon the kitchen was filled with the sweet aroma of pancakes cooking on the stove. As they sat together, eating and laughing, Lisa realized something important. She didn't need a wedding or a husband to feel complete. She had her daughter, her family, and a future that was now wide open with possibilities. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly happy. She had walked away from something that wasn't right, and in doing so, she had walked towards something even better. A life filled with love, honesty, and a bond that could never be broken.